Sarah Chun had perfected the art of being invisible. At 26, she moved through the military base like a ghost, clipboard in hand, counting magazines, cataloging supplies, and maintaining the mundane records that kept the 3rd Infantry Division running smoothly. Her uniform was always pressed, her brown hair pulled back in regulation style, and her glasses perched perfectly on her nose. To everyone around her, she was just another pencil-pushing administrator lost in the maze of military bureaucracy. The ammunition depot was her domain. Row upon row of metal shelving stretched toward the ceiling, each section meticulously organized and tracked. Sarah knew every serial number, every expiration date, every single round that entered or left her warehouse. The other soldiers called her the counter behind her back, though never with malice. She was reliable, quiet, and forgettable, exactly how she preferred it. Colonel Marcus Webb first noticed her on a Tuesday morning in March. He was conducting his monthly inspection of the supply chain, a routine he took seriously after too many missions had failed due to equipment shortages. Most administrators stumbled through these visits, nervous and unprepared, but Sarah was different. She moved with precision, answered every question without consulting notes, and demonstrated a knowledge of ammunition that went far beyond basic inventory management. "Tell me about the M118LR rounds," Colonel Webb had asked, testing her knowledge of the long-range ammunition used by their snipers. Sarah's response was immediate and detailed. 7.62 NATO 175-grain Sierra Match King bullet, designed for precision shooting out to 800 meters. We currently have 2,847 rounds in stock, with an additional 1,200 on order. The lot we received last month showed exceptional consistency in the ballistic testing reports, with sub-MOA accuracy when fired from properly maintained rifles. The colonel raised an eyebrow. Most supply clerks knew quantities and part numbers, but Sarah spoke about ballistic performance like someone who understood what happened after the trigger was pulled. There was something in her voice, a familiarity that suggested more than academic knowledge. Throughout the inspection, Colonel Webb noticed other details. Sarah's posture was military perfect, but there was something else, the way she unconsciously calculated distances when looking across the warehouse, how her eyes automatically identified cover and concealment positions, the subtle way she positioned herself to maintain clear sight lines to all entrances. These weren't the habits of a supply clerk. After the inspection, Colonel Webb made some inquiries. Sarah Chin's military record was unremarkable on the surface. She had enlisted 3 years ago, completed basic training with average scores, and been assigned to logistics. Her evaluations were consistently positive, but never outstanding. She kept to herself, had no disciplinary issues, and performed her duties with quiet efficiency. By all accounts, she was the perfect invisible soldier. But Colonel Webb had spent 22 years in the Army, including multiple combat deployments, and he had learned to read between the lines. Something about Sarah Chun didn't add up. Her knowledge of ammunition went beyond what her training should have provided, and there was an alertness in her demeanor that suggested combat awareness rather than warehouse experience. That evening, Colonel Webb accessed Sarah's complete military file on his secure terminal. What he found was a masterpiece of bureaucratic misdirection. Her enlistment papers showed she had requested logistics training, citing an interest in supply chain management. Her aptitude scores were good, but not exceptional. Her background check was clean, no red flags, no security concerns, no indicators of special skills or training. Yet as Colonel Webb read deeper, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Sarah had scored exceptionally high on the marksmanship portions of basic training, though her instructors had noted she seemed to already possess advanced shooting fundamentals. Her physical fitness scores were well above average, particularly in areas requiring steady hands and controlled breathing. Most tellingly, her psychological evaluation had noted unusual composure under pressure and natural ability to remain calm in stressful situations. These weren't necessarily red flags, but they painted a picture that didn't match the quiet supply clerk he had met. Colonel Webb had seen enough soldiers to recognize when someone was hiding their true capabilities. The question was why. The next morning, Colonel Webb returned to the ammunition depot unannounced. He found Sarah exactly where he expected, methodically checking inventory, updating her computerized tracking system with the same attention to detail that had impressed him the day before. But this time, he watched her differently, looking for clues rather than simply evaluating her work performance. "Ms. Chun," he said, causing her to look up from her clipboard. "Walk me through your daily routine." Sarah complied without hesitation, leading him through the warehouse while explaining her system for tracking inventory turnover, identifying discrepancies, and maintaining optimal stock levels. As she talked, Colonel Webb noticed how naturally she handled the various types of ammunition, her fingers automatically checking for signs of corrosion or damage with the expertise of someone who understood the consequences of faulty rounds. When they reached the section containing sniper ammunition, Sarah's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. Her movements became even more precise. Her voice took on a reverent tone when discussing the specialized rounds, and she demonstrated an intimate knowledge of how different bullet weights and powder charges affected long-range performance. "You seem particularly knowledgeable about precision ammunition," Colonel Webb observed. Sarah's response was carefully measured. "These rounds represent significant investment, sir. They require special storage conditions and careful handling. I make it my business to understand the equipment I'm responsible for maintaining." It was a perfectly reasonable answer, but Colonel Webb caught the slight hesitation before she spoke, the way her eyes flickered briefly toward the exit and the unconscious straightening of her shoulders. These were micro-expressions he had learned to recognize in soldiers who were hiding something important. Over the following week, Colonel Webb made several more unannounced visits to the ammunition depot. Each time, he found Sarah performing her duties with the same quiet competence, but he also began to notice patterns that didn't fit the profile of a typical supply clerk. Sarah arrived at work earlier than required and stayed later than necessary, but these weren't the habits of someone trying to impress superiors. Instead, she seemed to use the quiet hours to maintain equipment and organize supplies with a level of care that suggested personal investment rather than mere job performance. Her computer showed research into ballistic performance data that went far beyond what her position required, including detailed studies of wind drift calculations and environmental factors affecting long-range accuracy. Most significantly, Colonel Webb discovered that Sarah had been quietly identifying and reporting ammunition defects that other personnel had missed. Her monthly reports included detailed analyses of quality issues that had prevented potentially dangerous malfunctions. This wasn't the work of someone simply counting inventory. It was the expertise of someone who understood the life and death importance of reliable ammunition. The breakthrough came on a Friday afternoon when Colonel Webb arrived at the depot to find Sarah training a new soldier on ammunition handling procedures. As he watched from an unobserved position, he saw her demonstrate proper inspection techniques for various types of rounds, her explanations revealing knowledge that could only come from extensive practical experience. "When you're checking match-grade ammunition," Sarah was saying to the young soldier, "you need to look for consistent bullet seating depth. Even small variations can affect accuracy at extended range. See how this round has a slightly different profile? That inconsistency could mean the difference between a clean shot and a miss that costs lives." The new soldier asked, "How do you know so much about this stuff? I thought you just counted inventory." Sarah's answer was carefully neutral, but Colonel Webb caught the momentary tension in her voice. "You learn things when you pay attention to what you're responsible for. This ammunition protects the lives of our soldiers. It deserves respect and understanding." That evening, Colonel Webb made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing his subtle investigation, he chose a more direct approach. He would confront Sarah Chun directly and give her the opportunity to tell him the truth about who she really was. The following Monday morning, Colonel Webb arrived at the ammunition depot with a specific purpose. He found Sarah performing her usual inventory checks, but this time he brought with him a file folder containing documents that would force the conversation he needed to have. Ms. Chun, he said, his tone more serious than their previous interactions. I need to speak with you privately. Please lock up the depot and come with me. Sarah's reaction was subtle, but telling. For just a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing a flash of something that looked like resignation mixed with relief. She secured the warehouse according to protocol and followed Colonel Webb to his office without question, but her military bearing had shifted into something more alert, more ready for whatever was coming. As they walked across the base, Colonel Webb noticed how Sarah automatically scanned their surroundings, her eyes checking rooftops and elevated positions with the unconscious habit of someone trained to identify potential sniper positions. It was a small detail, but it confirmed his growing suspicions about the woman walking beside him. In his office, Colonel Webb gestured for Sarah to take a seat while he settled behind his desk with a file folder. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and carefully guarded secrets. Sarah, Colonel Webb began, using her first name deliberately, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who you really are and what you're doing in my ammunition depot. Sarah met his gaze steadily, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for him to continue. In that moment, Colonel Webb saw past the careful facade she had maintained for 3 years. Behind her glasses, her eyes held the kind of steady focus he had seen in his best marksmen, the calm intensity that separated true precision shooters from ordinary soldiers. The game of hide and seek was finally coming to an end, and both of them knew it. Colonel Webb opened the file folder and spread several documents across his desk. Sarah recognized her own military records, but there were other papers she had never seen before, official-looking forms with black redaction marks and letterheads from organizations she couldn't identify. Before we begin, Colonel Webb said, I want you to know that this conversation is off the record. I'm not here to destroy your career or expose secrets you've worked hard to protect. But I need to understand what I'm dealing with because the safety of my soldiers may depend on it. Sarah remained silent, her training kicking in. When in doubt, listen, gather information. Never volunteer more than necessary. These were lessons learned through years of experience that had nothing to do with counting magazines in a supply depot. Colonel Webb picked up the top document from her file. Your enlistment paperwork shows that you requested assignment to logistics after completing basic training. According to your instructors, you were a model recruit, followed orders, kept your head down, and graduated without distinction. But there's something interesting in their private notes. He turned the paper so Sarah could see the handwritten comments in the margins. Drill Sergeant Martinez wrote that you demonstrated unusual composure under stress and possessed advanced marksmanship fundamentals that exceeded instruction level. Weapons Instructor Thompson noted that you seemed to be deliberately underperforming during live fire exercises. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly in her lap. Colonel Webb continued reading from her file. Your psychological evaluation described you as highly intelligent with exceptional focus and concentration abilities. The evaluating officer recommended you for advanced training programs, but you declined all opportunities and specifically requested assignment to non-combat roles. He looked up at her. Why would someone with your apparent abilities choose to hide in a supply depot? Still, Sarah remained silent. Colonel Webb had expected this resistance, but he had prepared for it. He reached for another document, this one bearing the seal of the Department of Defense Intelligence Agency. This is where things get interesting, he said. 3 weeks ago, I submitted a routine security inquiry about unusual ammunition inventory patterns. Nothing serious, just the colonel doing his due diligence. But when your name came up in that inquiry, it triggered something in the system. Within 48 hours, I received a phone call from a DIA analyst who seemed very interested in why I was asking questions about Sarah Chin. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. The mention of the Defense Intelligence Agency clearly meant something to her, and for the first time since entering his office, she showed a flicker of genuine emotion. Colonel Webb leaned forward. The analyst didn't give me specifics, but he did tell me that you had a special background that required careful handling. He also mentioned that your current assignment was part of something called administrative repositioning for operational security purposes. That's a very fancy way of saying you're hiding from something or someone. Sir, Sarah spoke for the first time since entering his office. I'm not sure what you think you've discovered, but my record speaks for itself. I'm a supply clerk. I count ammunition and maintain inventory. That's what I do. That's what you do now, Colonel Webb corrected. But it's not what you used to do, is it? Because supply clerks don't instinctively calculate wind drift when they look across a warehouse. They don't unconsciously check for elevated shooting positions every time they enter a new space. And they certainly don't possess the kind of detailed ballistic knowledge you demonstrated last week. Sarah's jaw tightened. She was trapped between competing loyalties, the cover story she had maintained for 3 years, and the respect she had developed for the colonel sitting across from her. Colonel Webb played his final card. He pulled out a photograph and placed it face down on the desk. Before you decide how to respond, I want you to see something. This came with the DI analyst's follow-up report. He turned the photograph over. It showed a woman in desert camouflage, lying prone behind a precision rifle on a rocky outcrop. The woman's face was partially obscured by a scope, but her build, her posture, and the visible portion of her profile were unmistakably Sarah Chun. In the bottom corner of the photo, someone had written Staff Sergeant S. Chun, 19, Operation Desert Viper. Sarah stared at the photograph for a long moment, and when she looked up, her entire demeanor had changed. The careful mask of the invisible supply clerk was gone, replaced by the bearing of a professional soldier who had been caught in a necessary deception. "How much do you know?" she asked quietly. "Not enough," Colonel Webb admitted. "But I know that the woman in this photograph isn't the same person who's been counting my ammunition for 3 years. I know that someone with your skills doesn't end up in a supply depot by accident. And I know that good soldiers don't hide their abilities unless they have compelling reasons." Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering her options. After 3 years of careful anonymity, the relief of potentially dropping her cover was almost overwhelming. But she had to be sure she could trust the man across from her. "If I tell you the truth," she said, "it stays in this room. There are people whose lives depend on certain information remaining classified." "You have my word as an officer," Colonel Webb replied without hesitation. Sarah nodded, then began to speak with the measured precision of someone who had been trained to brief military commanders. "My name is Sarah Chun, but that wasn't always true. 3 years ago, I was Staff Sergeant Chun, assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment as a precision marksman and intelligence operative. I serve in classified operations across the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Africa. My official military record shows logistics training because my real training was compartmentalized under special operations protocols." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing with the most difficult part of her story. "In 2019, I was part of a joint task force hunting a high-value target in Syria. The operation was compromised, and my team was ambushed. I was the only survivor." Her voice remained steady, but Colonel Webb could see the weight of that memory in her eyes. "During the firefight, I managed to neutralize 7 enemy combatants from a concealed position, allowing our backup units to reach the scene and recover sensitive intelligence." The photograph, Colonel Webb said, understanding, was taken during the aftermath. "The intelligence we recovered led to the disruption of a major terrorist network, but it also exposed the fact that our operations had been leaked by someone within our command structure. There was a mole, someone with access to classified mission details." Sarah's training showed in how she continued to speak in operational terms, distancing herself emotionally from events that had clearly been traumatic. "Army intelligence determined that my identity had been compromised. The enemy knew who I was, knew my capabilities, and had specifically targeted my team because of my success in previous operations. They recommended that I be reassigned under a false identity while they investigated the security breach. So they turned you into a supply clerk," Colonel Webb said. "The theory was that hiding in plain sight would be more effective than witness protection or overseas assignment. They created a new military record, gave me logistics training, and Assign me to a quiet base where I could blend in while investigators worked to identify and eliminate the security threat. Colonel Webb absorbed this information, understanding now why Sarah had been so careful to remain invisible. How long were you supposed to maintain this cover? Originally, 6 months to a year, long enough for them to root out the mole and neutralize any remaining threats. Sarah's expression darkened. That was 3 years ago. The investigation stalled, the case went cold, and eventually my handler stopped returning my calls. As far as I know, I'm still officially dead to the special operations community. What about your family? Friends? Your entire previous life? Gone, Sarah said simply. My parents think I died in that ambush in Syria. My military friends think I died in that ambush in Syria. The only people who know the truth are a handful of intelligence officers who may or may not still care about my situation. The weight of Sarah's sacrifice began to register with Colonel Webb. She hadn't just changed assignments. She had given up her identity, her relationships, and her professional recognition to protect national security interests that might have forgotten about her. Why didn't you come forward sooner? He asked. Try to reclaim your real career. Sarah's laugh held no humor. And say what? That I'm actually a dead special operations soldier who's been living under false pretenses for 3 years. That I've been lying to everyone around me while maintaining a false identity? Even if Army intelligence confirmed my story, my military career would be over. Who would trust a soldier who spent years deceiving her command structure? Colonel Webb understood the impossible position she was in. Military careers were built on trust and reliability. Even if Sarah's deception had been ordered by higher authorities, the practical effect of her situation made it nearly impossible for her to return to normal service. So you decided to become the best supply clerk in the Army instead, he said. I decided to serve in whatever capacity I could, Sarah corrected. The skills that made me effective as a special operations soldier, attention to detail, understanding of equipment capabilities, ability to think systematically about complex problems, those skills transfer to logistics. I may not be hunting terrorists anymore, but I'm still protecting the lives of American soldiers by making sure they have reliable equipment. Colonel Webb studied the woman across from his desk with new understanding. The quiet competence he had admired was actually the disciplined professionalism of an elite soldier adapting to circumstances beyond her control. Sarah Chun hadn't been hiding from responsibility. She had been finding new ways to serve her country despite impossible constraints. There's something else you need to know, Sarah continued. My presence here isn't completely accidental. When Army intelligence assigned me to this base, they chose it specifically because of its proximity to several training facilities that occasionally handle classified operations. Part of my unofficial mission was to monitor for any signs that the security breach that compromised my original team might be ongoing. Have you found anything? Colonel Webb asked. Nothing definitive, but there have been some irregularities in ammunition requisitions that don't match the reported training schedules. Small discrepancies that most people would overlook, but they form a pattern that concerns me. Colonel Webb felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align in his mind. Sarah's expertise with ammunition wasn't just from her special operations background. She had been using her position to quietly investigate potential security issues. You've been conducting your own intelligence operation from inside my supply depot, he realized. I've been doing my job, Sarah replied. All of it. The visible part and the parts that nobody talks about. As their conversation continued, Colonel Webb began to understand that he hadn't just discovered a hidden asset. He had found a soldier who embodied the best qualities of military service, even under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Colonel Webb spent the next hour reviewing the ammunition discrepancy report Sarah had quietly compiled over the past 18 months. What she showed him was a masterclass in intelligence analysis disguised as routine supply management. Her reports documented patterns that painted a troubling picture of potential security breaches within their training operations. Look at these requisition patterns, Sarah explained, spreading printouts across the colonel's desk. Every 6 weeks, someone orders specialized ammunition for advanced marksmanship training that doesn't appear on any official training calendars. The orders are always signed by different officers, but they follow the same pattern. Small quantities of match-grade rounds ordered on Friday afternoons, when most administrative staff have left for the weekend. Colonel Webb studied the documents with growing concern. As Sarah walked him through her analysis, he began to see connections that should have raised red flags months ago. The ammunition in question wasn't standard training rounds. It was precision equipment designed for long-range shooting, the kind used by military snipers and specialized law enforcement units. The concerning part, Sarah continued, is that these rounds are never returned to inventory after the supposed training exercises. According to my tracking system, we've provided over 3,000 rounds of match-grade ammunition for training exercises that officially never happened. Why didn't you report this through normal channels? Colonel Webb asked. Sarah's expression grew carefully neutral. I tried. I submitted the discrepancy reports according to standard protocol. Each time, I was told that the ammunition had been transferred to other units for classified training purposes and that the paperwork would be corrected later. But the corrections never came, and the pattern continued. Colonel Webb felt a chill as he realized the implications. If Sarah was right, someone was using her ammunition depot to supply unauthorized operations, possibly the same kind of security breach that had compromised her original special operations team. There's more, Sarah said, pulling out another set of documents. I've been tracking the personnel who sign for these ammunition transfers. Most of them are legitimate officers, but their signatures appear on days when duty rosters show they were off base or on leave. Someone has been forging authorization documents. The evidence was damning, but Colonel Webb needed to understand why Sarah had been investigating this alone instead of escalating through proper channels. You suspected this was connected to your original security compromise, he said. The pattern was too familiar, Sarah admitted. In Syria, we lost 3 operations because someone was leaking our ammunition requirements to enemy forces. They knew exactly what kind of equipment we were carrying, which suggested access to our supply chain information. When I started seeing similar irregularities here, I couldn't ignore the possibility of a connection. Colonel Webb leaned back in his chair, processing the implications of what Sarah had revealed. She hadn't just been hiding in his supply depot. She had been conducting a sophisticated counterintelligence operation while maintaining her cover as an ordinary logistics clerk. Who else knows about your investigation? He asked. No one. I learned in special operations that information is ammunition. You don't waste it on targets that can't help you complete the mission. Until now, I wasn't sure who I could trust. What changed? Sarah met his eyes directly. You did. The way you've been investigating me over the past few weeks showed me that you're the kind of officer who notices details and follows up on inconsistencies. More importantly, you're asking the right questions instead of accepting convenient answers. Colonel Webb understood that Sarah had been evaluating him just as carefully as he had been studying her. The realization that she had deliberately revealed her identity because she trusted his judgment carried significant weight. What do you need from me? He asked. Permission to expand the investigation, Sarah replied without hesitation. The ammunition discrepancies are just the surface. If someone is running unauthorized operations using our supply chain, there will be other indicators. Vehicle maintenance records, communications logs, personnel movement patterns. The full picture is probably hidden in data that only someone with my background would know how to analyze. Colonel Webb considered her request carefully. Officially, he should report this conversation to higher authorities and let Army intelligence handle the investigation. But Sarah's experience with the bureaucratic response to her previous security concerns suggested that official channels might not be effective. If I authorize this, he said, you'll need access to classified information systems that your current security clearance doesn't cover. My original clearance was never officially revoked, Sarah replied. It was suspended pending completion of the security investigation. If you submit a request for reactivation based on operational necessity, it should be processed within 48 hours. And if this investigation uncovers something significant, then we'll have evidence to present to the appropriate authorities. But more importantly, we'll have disrupted a potential security threat to active operations. Colonel Webb made his decision with the deliberation of an officer who had learned to trust his instincts about people. I'm going to authorize limited access to relevant records for the purpose of investigating supply chain irregularities. Officially, this will be described as a routine audit of inventory management procedures. Thank you, sir, Sarah said. And for the first time since entering his office, she allowed herself a small smile. Don't thank me yet, Colonel Webb warned. If this investigation goes wrong, both our careers are finished. And if you're right about a security breach, we may be walking into something much more dangerous than ammunition discrepancies. Over the following week, Sarah's investigation expanded with methodical precision. Colonel Webb arranged for her security clearance reactivation and provided access to the computer systems she needed to analyze patterns across multiple departments. What they discovered was more extensive than either had anticipated. The unauthorized ammunition transfers were part of a larger operation that included vehicle requisitions, communications equipment, and personnel assignments that didn't match official records. Someone had been using the base's resources to support activities that existed outside normal command structures. Sarah's analysis revealed that the operation had been running for at least 2 years, with increasing frequency over recent months. The sophistication required to coordinate these activities suggested involvement by someone with significant access to base operations and detailed knowledge of military supply procedures. Whoever is running this has inside knowledge of how our systems work, Sarah explained during one of their evening briefings. They know exactly which forms to forge, which officers are likely to be off base on specific dates, and how to time requisitions to avoid scrutiny. This isn't random theft. It's a professional intelligence operation. Colonel Webb studied the timeline Sarah had constructed, showing the correlation between unauthorized activities and real-world events. These dates coincide with several NATO training exercises and joint operations with Allied forces. Someone could be gathering intelligence about Allied military capabilities, or selling information to hostile actors, Sarah added grimly. The equipment being taken includes specialized communications gear and precision ammunition that could be used to compromise ongoing operations. Their investigation had reached the point where they needed to involve higher authorities, but Colonel Webb was concerned about the security implications of reporting through normal channels. If the operation included personnel with legitimate access to classified information, any official report could alert the perpetrators and allow them to cover their tracks. We need to be strategic about how we handle this, he told Sarah. If we're right about the scope of this operation, exposing it incorrectly could compromise ongoing missions and put soldiers at risk. Sarah nodded. I have a contact at Army Intelligence who handled my original case. He was one of the few officers who seemed genuinely committed to finding the truth rather than closing files quickly. If he's still in the same position, he might be able to help us navigate this properly. Make the contact, Colonel Webb decided. But be careful about what information you share initially. If this investigation has taught us anything, it's that we can't assume anyone is completely trustworthy until we understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. The next morning, Sarah used a secure communication system to reach out to Major David Rodriguez, the Army intelligence officer who had been her primary contact during the original security investigation. His response came within hours, and it was both encouraging and concerning. Rodriguez confirmed that he was still investigating cases related to Sarah's original security breach. More significantly, he revealed that similar patterns of unauthorized supply activities had been identified at 3 other military installations over the past year. The Army intelligence community was beginning to recognize these activities as part of a coordinated operation, but they had been struggling to identify the common elements that connected the different incidents. Your information could be the key to understanding this network, Rodriguez explained during a secure video conference with Sarah and Colonel Webb. We've been looking at these incidents as separate security breaches, but if they're all connected to the same operation, it changes our entire approach to the investigation. Colonel Webb felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What had started as curiosity about an unusually competent supply clerk had evolved into a counterintelligence operation with national security implications. "What do you need from us?" he asked Rodriguez. "Continued monitoring and documentation, but with enhanced security protocols. If this operation is as sophisticated as it appears, the people running it will eventually notice that their activities are being tracked. We need to be prepared for them to either escalate their operations or attempt to eliminate the sources of their exposure." The implications of Rodriguez's warning were clear to everyone on the call. Sarah's investigation had put both her and Colonel Webb in potential danger from an adversary that had already demonstrated willingness to eliminate military personnel who posed a threat to their operations. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "Based on the timeline you've provided, this operation began approximately 6 months after Staff Sergeant Shun was transferred to your facility. That timing could be coincidental, but it's also possible that her presence triggered some kind of response from the people responsible for her original security compromise." Sarah's expression grew grim as she processed this information. "They might have identified my location and resumed operations specifically to draw me out of hiding." "It's a possibility we have to consider," Rodriguez agreed. "Which means this investigation is no longer just about protecting military resources. It's about protecting the personnel who have become targets because of their involvement in exposing this network." Colonel Webb realized that his decision to support Sarah's investigation had consequences that extended far beyond their base. They were now actively engaged in a counterintelligence operation against an adversary that had proven capability to compromise military security and eliminate personnel who threatened their activities. The quiet supply clerk he had discovered counting magazines was about to become the center of a dangerous game that would test everything she had learned as a special operations soldier. 3 days after the secure conference with Major Rodriguez, Sarah's carefully maintained routine at the ammunition depot was shattered by an incident that confirmed their worst fears. She arrived at work to find her computer system had been accessed during the night, despite security protocols that should have prevented unauthorized entry. Whoever had gained access was skilled enough to cover their tracks, but Sarah's special operations training had taught her to look for signs that most people would miss. The intrusion had been subtle, but thorough. Files had been copied rather than deleted. System logs had been carefully edited to remove evidence of the unauthorized access, and her personal security credentials had been compromised. Most concerning, the intruder had specifically targeted her investigation files and the ammunition tracking databases that contained evidence of the unauthorized operations. Colonel Webb arrived at the depot within minutes of receiving Sarah's urgent call. Together, they conducted a detailed analysis of the security breach while maintaining the appearance of routine inventory management in case they were being watched. "This wasn't random," Sarah explained, pointing to patterns in the system logs that revealed the intruder's sophisticated technical capabilities. They knew exactly which files to target and how to access them without triggering automatic security alerts. This level of access requires either advanced hacking skills or insider knowledge of our computer systems. "Could they have discovered everything about your investigation?" Colonel Webb asked. "They accessed the main files, but I've been maintaining parallel records on a separate system that isn't connected to the base network. The core evidence of their activities is still secure, but they now know that someone has been tracking their operations." The implications were immediate and dangerous. If the people behind the unauthorized activities knew they were being investigated, they might accelerate their operations, eliminate evidence, or take direct action against the investigators. Colonel Webb made a quick decision. "We're implementing enhanced security protocols immediately. I'm assigning additional personnel to depot security, and you're not working alone anymore. If these people are willing to conduct unauthorized computer intrusions, they might be prepared to take more direct action." Sarah appreciated the colonel's concern, but her special operations experience suggested a different approach. Increased security might actually make things worse. If we change our patterns too dramatically, it signals that we know about the intrusion. That could force them to take action before we're ready. What do you recommend? "We continue normal operations while quietly implementing countermeasures. I maintain my regular schedule and duties, but with concealed backup and enhanced communication protocols. Meanwhile, we use their interest in our investigation to gather intelligence about their capabilities and intentions. Colonel Webb understood Sarah's tactical thinking, but he was reluctant to use her as bait for an unknown adversary. That puts you at significant personal risk. The risk exists whether we acknowledge it or not, Sarah replied. At least this way, we maintain some control over the situation. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Mike Torres, a military police officer whom Colonel Webb had quietly asked to assist with depot security. Torres was a veteran with combat experience and investigative skills that made him ideal for their current situation. "Sir," Torres reported, "I've completed the perimeter security assessment you requested. There are several locations around the depot that could provide concealed observation positions for someone conducting surveillance. I've also identified potential entry and exit routes that wouldn't be covered by our standard security cameras." Sarah studied the tactical assessment Torres had prepared, recognizing the professional quality of his analysis. His recommendations showed understanding of how special operations personnel might approach target surveillance and infiltration. "Sergeant Torres," she said, "your assessment suggests familiarity with special operations tactics. What's your background?" "3 tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne, ma'am. I spent 18 months working with Special Operations Forces on counterinsurgency missions. I've seen how professional adversaries operate, and I know how to recognize the signs when someone with advanced training is conducting surveillance or planning operations." Colonel Webb realized that Torres might be exactly the additional asset they needed. "Sergeant, I'm going to read you into a classified operation. What we're dealing with here goes beyond routine depot security." Over the next hour, they briefed Torres on the investigation and the security concerns that had developed from the computer intrusion. Torres absorbed the information with the calm professionalism of a soldier who had dealt with complex threat situations. "Based on what you've told me," Torres said, "I recommend we treat this as a counterintelligence operation rather than a security investigation. We need to assume that our adversaries have professional training and significant resources. That changes how we approach both protective measures and intelligence gathering." Sarah found herself impressed by Torres' tactical thinking. "What would you recommend for immediate protective measures?" "We establish a covert security perimeter around your normal activities without changing your visible routines. I coordinate with base security to position personnel who can provide overwatch while appearing to conduct routine duties. Most importantly, we develop contingency plans for different threat scenarios so everyone knows how to respond if the situation escalates." Colonel Webb approved Torres' recommendations and authorized him to coordinate with base security personnel on a need-to-know basis. Their investigation was evolving into an active counterintelligence operation that required military precision and special operations expertise. That evening, Sarah remained at the depot later than usual to complete what appeared to be routine inventory tasks. In reality, she was implementing new security measures while maintaining surveillance for any signs that their adversaries might be conducting reconnaissance. Her patience was rewarded just after sunset when her concealed motion sensors detected movement in the tree line beyond the depot's perimeter fence. Someone was watching the facility, and their positioning suggested professional surveillance training. Sarah used hand signals to communicate with Torres, who was monitoring the situation from a concealed position inside the depot. Together, they observed 2 individuals who were conducting systematic surveillance of the depot's security measures and access points. The surveillance team's equipment and methodology confirmed their worst fears. These weren't amateur thieves or opportunistic criminals. They were professional operatives with military or intelligence training. Their night vision equipment, communication gear, and tactical movement patterns indicated significant resources and sophisticated planning. Sarah documented the surveillance activity while Torres coordinated with base security to establish a wider perimeter that would allow them to track the operatives when they departed. The goal was intelligence gathering rather than immediate apprehension. They needed to understand the scope of the operation before taking direct action. After 3 hours of observation, the surveillance team withdrew using routes that avoided base security patrols and external monitoring systems. Their departure demonstrated intimate knowledge of base security procedures and highlighted the insider access that made their operations possible. They're professionals, Torres confirmed during their post-incident briefing. Military or intelligence background, current access to base security information, and resources that suggest significant organizational support. Colonel Webb reviewed the surveillance footage and communication intercepts that Torres had collected. This confirms that we're dealing with a sophisticated operation that poses genuine security threats to base personnel and operations. Sarah studied the tactical assessment with growing concern. The level of surveillance they conducted tonight suggests they're planning some kind of direct action. Professional operatives don't invest this much effort in reconnaissance unless they're preparing for a specific operation. What kind of operation? Colonel Webb asked. Could be intelligence gathering, evidence elimination, or personnel neutralization. Based on the timing and their focus on the depot, I suspect they're planning to either steal specific ammunition or eliminate the source of the investigation that's threatening their network. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. Sarah's investigation had exposed a professional intelligence operation, and that operation was now preparing to take direct action to protect itself. The quiet supply clerk who had spent 3 years hiding in an ammunition depot was about to face the same kind of professional adversaries who had killed her special operations team in Syria. Colonel Webb made the decision that would determine how the next phase of their operation would unfold. We're not waiting for them to come to us. Starting tomorrow, we're going on the offensive. Sarah, I need you to use your special operations training to help us identify and neutralize this threat before they can eliminate the evidence or harm personnel. Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as her dormant special operations skills began to reactivate. After 3 years of hiding behind a supply clerk's identity, she was about to return to the kind of mission that had defined her military career. What are you authorizing? She asked. I'm authorizing you to be who you really are, Colonel Webb replied. Staff Sergeant Shun, Special Operations veteran, and precision marksman. We need those skills now, and we need them deployed against people who have demonstrated willingness to kill American soldiers to protect their operations. Torres nodded his agreement. If these people are planning direct action against the depot or investigation personnel, our best defense is to identify them before they can execute their plans. That requires the kind of counterintelligence and tactical skills that regular base security doesn't provide. Sarah felt the weight of returning to her true identity after years of careful concealment. But the professional adversaries they were facing left no choice. The supply clerk persona that had protected her for 3 years would not be sufficient for the challenges ahead. I'll need access to specialized equipment and communication systems, she said. If we're going operational against professional adversaries, we need capabilities that match their level of sophistication. Colonel Webb had anticipated this requirement. Major Rodriguez is coordinating support from Army intelligence. By tomorrow morning, you'll have access to the equipment and backup personnel necessary for a full counterintelligence operation. As their planning session continued into the night, Sarah felt herself transitioning back into the mindset that had made her effective as a special operations soldier. The quiet supply clerk who counted ammunition was being replaced by Staff Sergeant Shun, precision marksman and intelligence operative, ready to hunt the people who threatened her adopted military family. The ammunition depot that had been her sanctuary for 3 years was about to become the center of a battle between professional soldiers and the covert network that had already cost too many lives. The transformation was remarkable. Within 48 hours of Colonel Webb's authorization, Sarah Chun had evolved from a quiet supply clerk into a fully operational Special Forces asset. Major Rodriguez had coordinated the delivery of specialized equipment that included advanced surveillance gear, secure communication systems, and precision weapons that Sarah hadn't touched in 3 years. The ammunition depot became the nerve center for a counterintelligence operation that stretched across the entire base. Sarah's intimate knowledge of supply chain operations, combined with her special operations training, allowed her to identify patterns and connections that had been invisible to traditional security investigations. The breakthrough came when I analyzed the timing of their activities against the base's operational calendar, Sarah explained during a secure briefing with Colonel Webb, Sergeant Torres, and Major Rodriguez via encrypted video link. They're not just stealing ammunition and equipment, they're gathering intelligence about specific upcoming operations. Her analysis showed that the unauthorized requisitions coincided with classified exercises involving NATO allies and joint training operations with Special Forces units. The equipment being taken included specialized ammunition designed for precision shooting, advanced communications gear, and surveillance equipment that could be used to compromise ongoing missions. The pattern suggests they're either selling this intelligence to hostile actors or using it to target specific military operations, Sarah continued. Either way, they represent an active threat to operational security and personnel safety. Major Rodriguez had been coordinating similar investigations at other installations, and Sarah's findings provided the missing pieces that connected seemingly separate incidents into a comprehensive picture of the adversary network. We've identified at least 6 installations where similar activities have occurred, Rodriguez reported. In each case, the operations began shortly after personnel with special operations backgrounds were assigned to routine duties. It appears this network specifically targets facilities where they believe former special operations soldiers might be hiding. The implications were chilling. The network hadn't just stumbled upon Sarah's location. They had systematically identified installations where soldiers with valuable intelligence might be concealed under administrative cover identities. Colonel Webb absorbed this information with a grim understanding that his base had become a target because of Sarah's presence. How many other soldiers like Sarah might be at risk? We're working to identify and protect all personnel who might be targets, Rodriguez replied. But right now, our immediate priority is neutralizing the threat to your installation before they can execute whatever operation they're planning. The intelligence Sarah had gathered suggested that the adversary network was preparing for a major operation within the next 72 hours. Surveillance patterns, equipment requisitions, and communication intercepts all indicated accelerated planning for some kind of direct action. Based on their recent activities, Sarah analyzed, I believe they're planning to simultaneously steal a large quantity of specialized ammunition and eliminate the personnel who have been investigating their operations. The timing suggests they want to complete both objectives during a single raid that would remove evidence and witnesses. Torres had been coordinating defensive preparations with base security personnel who had been briefed on a need-to-know basis. His assessment painted a picture of professional adversaries with significant capabilities and detailed operational planning. They've conducted surveillance of our defensive positions, identified our communication systems, and demonstrated knowledge of our personnel schedules, Torres reported. This isn't opportunistic criminal activity. It's a professional military operation designed to achieve specific objectives while minimizing their exposure. Colonel Webb realized that traditional base security measures would not be sufficient against adversaries with military training and insider knowledge. What do you recommend? Sarah's response came with the confidence of someone who had spent years planning and executing operations against professional adversaries. We use their intelligence gathering against them. They know our defensive positions and schedules because they've been conducting surveillance. But they don't know that we've identified their operation and prepared countermeasures. Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of reinforcing obvious defensive positions, they would establish concealed overwatch positions that covered the approaches the adversaries would likely use. Rather than changing schedules that might alert the network to their awareness, they would maintain normal routines while positioning response teams at strategic locations. The key is to let them begin their operation before revealing that we're prepared, Sarah explained. Once they commit to their plan, we can capture them with the evidence we need to dismantle their entire network. Major Rodriguez coordinated additional support from Army intelligence, including tactical teams that could provide backup if the situation escalated beyond what base personnel could handle. The operation was being planned with the precision of a special forces mission, because that's exactly what it had become. The night of the expected operation arrived with unseasonable fog that provided additional concealment for both Sarah's defensive positions and the adversary's approach routes. Sarah had positioned herself in an elevated hide that overlooked the ammunition depot, armed with a precision rifle that felt familiar despite 3 years of separation from such equipment. Colonel Webb and Torres coordinated from a command position that allowed them to monitor communications and direct response teams. Major Rodriguez was linked via secure satellite communication, providing real-time intelligence support and coordination with off-base assets. The adversaries began their operation at 0230 hours with professional precision that confirmed Sarah's assessment of their capabilities. A team of 4 operatives approached the depot using routes that avoided standard security patrols, while a separate team conducted electronic warfare operations designed to disrupt base communication systems. Sarah watched through her rifle scope as the infiltration team implemented sophisticated entry procedures that demonstrated military training and detailed operational planning. They moved with the coordination of soldiers who had worked together extensively, using hand signals and tactical formations that indicated special operations background. Overwatch to command, Sarah reported via secure radio. 4 military-aged males approaching primary target. Professional equipment and tactics. Recommend allowing full entry before initiating response to ensure evidence preservation. Colonel Webb acknowledged her recommendation while directing response teams to final positions. The operation was proceeding exactly as Sarah had predicted, with the adversaries committing to their plan without awareness that they were being monitored by prepared defenders. The breakthrough moment came when the infiltration team began loading specialized ammunition into transport containers while conducting detailed photography of depot security systems. This activity provided conclusive evidence of both theft and intelligence gathering that would be crucial for prosecuting the entire network. Sarah maintained overwatch, while Torres led a tactical team that moved to intercept the adversaries during their extraction. The operation was timed to allow maximum evidence collection while preventing the loss of personnel or equipment that could compromise ongoing investigations. Exécuté, Colonel Webb commanded. The response was swift and decisive. Torres' team surrounded the infiltration team, while Sarah provided precision overwatch that prevented any attempt at armed resistance. The electronic warfare team was simultaneously captured by base security personnel who had been positioned based on Sarah's analysis of their likely location. Within 15 minutes, all 6 members of the adversary team were in custody along with comprehensive evidence of their operations, equipment, and communication systems. More importantly, their capture provided access to intelligence that would allow Rodriguez and Army intelligence to identify and neutralize the broader network. The interrogation of the captured operatives revealed information that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. The network included active duty personnel, civilian contractors, and foreign intelligence assets who had been systematically exploiting military supply chains to gather intelligence and acquire specialized equipment for hostile purposes. Sarah's investigation had exposed not just a local security breach, but an international operation that posed threats to military installations across multiple continents. The ammunition discrepancies that had first caught her attention were part of a sophisticated network that had been operating undetected for several years. Major Rodriguez coordinated follow-up operations that resulted in arrests and security improvements at military installations in 4 countries. The intelligence gathered from Sarah's patient investigation and the final tactical operation provided evidence that disrupted hostile intelligence operations and prevented potential attacks on military personnel. 6 months after the final operation, Colonel Webb stood in the same ammunition depot where he had first met Sarah Chun. But everything had changed. Sarah had been officially reinstated to her correct rank and assignment, with recognition for both her original Special Operations Service and her counterintelligence work under administrative cover. Any regrets about giving up the quiet life of a supply clerk? Colonel Webb asked as they reviewed the depot's new security procedures. Sarah smiled as she checked inventory on specialized ammunition that was now properly secured and tracked by enhanced protocols. I learned something important during those 3 years. Military service isn't just about the dramatic missions that get recognition. Sometimes the most important work happens in the quiet places where nobody is watching. She paused, looking around the depot that had been both her sanctuary and her operational base. But I also learned that you can't run from who you are indefinitely. Eventually, the skills that define you as a soldier will be needed, and when that happens, you have to be ready to answer the call. Colonel Webb nodded his understanding. Sarah Chun had demonstrated that true military excellence wasn't diminished by administrative assignments or bureaucratic cover stories. Whether she was counting ammunition or hunting enemy operatives, she remained a soldier dedicated to protecting her fellow service members and national security interests. The woman everyone had thought was just tallying magazines had proven that the most dangerous adversaries often underestimate quiet professionals who understand their true mission, regardless of what their official job description might say. Sarah Chun had spent 3 years preparing for a mission she hoped would never come. And when it finally arrived, she was ready.